Alright, so let's combine all of these ideas now and do some combinations of different types of transformations. And notice now I have blank axes because I will need to label them in various different ways. So let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing I'm going to do is determine what my period is. So I'm going to take 2 pi and I'm going to divide it by my coefficient on x, in this case 3. So 2 pi over 3 is my period, which means if I label a tick mark way down here, I'm going to label it with the length of that period, in this instance 2 pi over 3. Now, to continue labeling this, I'm going to cut this distance directly in half, and that will be increasing the denominator by a power of 2. So that means it would instead of being 2 pi over 3, it's now 2 pi over 2 times 3 is 6. So 2 pi over 6, but another way you could think about that is pi over 3. And then I'm splitting that pi over 3 up in half, so pi over 6. And then I'm going to split that last one up, 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6. 3 pi over 6 is the same as pi over 2. So I get my axes, my horizontal axis labeled just by splitting things up using simple fractions. Alright, what next? I see that I have a coefficient of 2 in front of my function, which means the amplitude is 2. So I give myself a maximum value of 2 and a minimum value of negative 2. And now I can sketch my graph in. It is a sine function, but because of how I've labeled this, it's going to look like pretty much every other sine function we have graphed so far. So I have to remember that sine starts at its middle value and then goes up, and voila, we have our sine curve. So let's do number 6b now. Notice there is nothing modifying my period, so the period will still be 2 pi. So I can split up my axes accordingly in increments of pi over 2. So label all those real quick. And now, what do we have? Well, I see that I have this plus 2. That's going to shift everything up 2. So I'm going to start by going up 1, 2. And I think I will give myself a little symmetry line to help me in a moment. But I see that I have a coefficient of negative 3. So the negative is telling me it's been flipped upside down. The 3 is telling me the amplitude is 3. So I need to go up 1, 2, 3 from that axis of symmetry. So that is up at 5. That was at 2. And I need to go down 3 as well. So I need to go down to negative 1. But at this point, it's going to look like every other cosine graph, but it's been flipped on its head. So it's going to start at its minimum value, and then it's just going to oscillate through its cycle. Again, once you figure out your starting point, after that, it's really just a matter of letting it oscillate through the cycle and then sketching in the corresponding curve going through those points. And there we have our lovely negative cosine graph. Let's do 6c. Quite a few things all put together here. No coefficient in front of x, so my period is still 2 pi. Going to label my tick marks, 2 pi all the way down, cut it in half, pi, cut it in half, pi over 2, cut it in 3/4, 3 pi over 2. What else can I show? I see I have a plus 1 there, meaning everything is shifted up 1. I see my coefficient up front is 5, which means my graph is going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from that middle point, so it's up at 6, and down 5 as well, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down at negative 4. I can dot in that little symmetry line to help me out if I want to. You don't have to, but you might like it. And then one last thing, I see this minus pi over 2. That's telling me that I need to start to the right pi over 2. So my first value is going to start at the x value of pi over 2. And it's sine, so it starts in the middle. And then it goes up to its maximum, and then back down to its middle value, and then down to its negative like that. And I can work this backwards, and I can figure out that I have to have a negative 4 value right there. And I can sketch that in. And if you look at it, this actually looks a lot like a negative cosine graph without that phase shift. You can always write a sine or a cosine graph in terms of the other function. They are co-functions, meaning they are just shifted versions of each other. So let's go ahead and do this last one real quick. This one does have a modified period, so let's figure out what our period is. And again, it's labeled as t for the period. I need to take the normal period of 2 pi, and I need to divide that by my coefficient of pi over 4, which means really what I have here is 2 pi times 4 over pi. My pi's cancel, I'm left with 2 times 4, so I have 8. So, full period is 8, half a period is 4, quarter period is 2, 3/4 period is 6 right there. I see my amplitude is 2, but I also see this minus 2 at the end. So what I'm going to do is I am going to shift it down 1, 2 like that. But my amplitude is 2, so I know I will go 2 up. So I'm going to go up to 0, and 2 down, so I'm going to go down to -4. And at this stage, again, as before, just sketching a cosine curve now. Show my middle line maybe if I want to. Boom, boom, right there. And cosine starts at its maximum value. In this case, my maximum value is 0. And then it oscillates through its cycle. So now it's just a matter of following that pattern and letting it bip and bop back and forth. And there we go. I have one period of my cosine graph. So I have all 4 of these for number 6 shown. And hopefully it's making sense as to how we can sketch these curves.